May I comment on the story published in The Observer last Friday regarding Mr. Kevin Hawken? The gist of the story was that an elderly couple had recorded a private telephone conversation between Mr. Hawken and ex-Coronation Street star Lynn Perry. I do not rebuke Mr. Hawken for the statement. The cell was taped by a retired Blackburn couple who are amateur radio enthusiasts and spend most nights sitting up in bed scanning people's telephone conversations, as this is a picture often painted by the media. What I wish to do is assure Mr. Hawken that licensed radio amateurs, as opposed to some scanner radio users, do not indulge in this sort of behaviour. The radio amateur has had a bad press of late. He or she is depicted as an eccentric, duffel-coated figure whose only aim in life is to listen to other people's private conversations. I hope the above goes some way towards dispelling this myth. Radio hams are not eccentric busybodies. That was a letter sent to the Accrington Observer, published Friday the 19th of August 1994, from a radio amateur known as Mr. M. Robinson. The fact of the matter is that many radio amateurs, not all, but many of them, and scanner listeners, eavesdropped on police and cordless and mobile phones back in the golden age of British radio scanning. Many of us would do it today, but there would always be a niggling worry that you might stumble upon something you wish you hadn't heard. I've had a trawl through the Ringway library to find you some rare stories of radio amateurs and scanner enthusiasts stumbling upon transmissions they definitely weren't meant to hear. Some are reasonably detailed, others have been lost to time, but they're all extremely interesting nonetheless, and hopefully you've never heard them before. Our first chilling story involves a scanner listener who overheard two men discussing the plan to slit a man's throat on a mobile phone back in February 1998. Leeds Crown Court heard how three men plotted to murder Mark Hickman, who was from Keighley. The listener, named Stephen, was tuning around his radio scanner, which settled on a conversation that lasted 8 to 10 minutes, that included the plot to kill Hickman, referenced a nearby country lane and horses in a field. Hickman was found down that country lane on February 13, 1998, with his throat cut and severely beaten. In the transmission picked up from a mobile telephone, one man told the others that he was at a car park at the top of the lane. They said don't bring the car down, and that there were three people in the field with horses, and that if Hickman saw the car he'd flee. After a minute or so of silence, one man shouted down the phone that the others shouldn't bring the car down the lane, and said, "I'll tell you what we'll do, we'll get him in the car, you come round the back, drag him down the field, and slit his throat." An hour after Hickman was found, his burnt-out car along with another vehicle were found here, near the Windy Hill radio mast by the M62 at Saddleworth. Two of them were jailed for life in 1999, and the third was acquitted on the murder charge and convicted of the lesser offence of assisting an offender. This next story involved a Wrexham man who I won't name that tried to hire a hitman to shoot his ex-girlfriend. We'll call him the defendant, the hitman just that, and the eavesdropper the enthusiast. The radio enthusiast, scanner fanatic or radio ham depending on who you spoke to at the time, was listening to air traffic control transmissions when he claimed he accidentally heard a portable telephone conversation between the defendant and his friend. The enthusiast heard the two men agree on a fee of £1,000 to blast the 25-year-old woman in the leg with a double-barreled shotgun in February 1993. He tipped off the police, who arrested the Falklands veteran gunman, and officers set up a recording device at the police station, with the gunman helping to tape further conversations. The defendant was heard on the radio scanner saying his ex-girlfriend had done him a lot of harm. "I want her done, and done properly," he said. The enthusiast of Runcorn told the jury it was the coldness and the matter-of-fact of the conversation that drew his attention. It was as though they were discussing an everyday occurrence, he said. They didn't seem to mind that it was another human being. It made the hair stand up on the back of my neck. The defendant claimed that the whole plot was just a joke, a Beatles-about type prank, to wind up the gunman to see how far he'd go. The court didn't agree, and he was freed on bail pending sentencing after being found guilty at Chester Crown Court. The jury took just over an hour to convict the 27-year-old defendant of incitement to commit grievous bodily harm. It's unclear what the man's sentence was, unfortunately. In mid-1989, police hunting a cliff-top double killer called in electronics experts and radio amateurs to help follow up a new lead. Businessman Peter Dixon, who was 51, was shot dead with his wife Gwenda, who was 52, in West Wales. Dixon was a keen radio amateur, and his call sign was G0HFQ. He was thought to have had conversations with local radio amateurs while on a camping holiday. Detectives found that the couple's Ford Sierra, parked next to their tent at Little Haven, was fitted with a powerful transceiver. Officers wanted to compile a list of Welsh and West Country radio amateurs who might have spoken over the air to the Dixons during their fortnight holiday. They were anxious to talk to anyone who had contact with Peter whilst he was operating as GW0HFQ/M on 7 or 14 MHz SSB, 28 MHz FM or SSB, and 144 MHz FM. The dates between which they wanted radio amateurs to check their logbooks were the 19th to the 29th of June 1989. Dyfed-Powys police believed that Peter Dixon had contact with another mobile station in the area on 28 MHz FM on the morning of Wednesday the 28th of June. They were last seen alive as they set off to walk the coastal path to Dale Village, 15 miles away, but their bodies were found later dumped in a thickly wooded gully. Dixon, a former RAF officer, had his hands tied behind his back. His wife, also shot several times, was lying nearby. It was later revealed that they were murdered by serial killer John William Cooper. He demanded they handed him their bank card and then forced them to disclose their PIN number. Cooper, carrying a sawn-off shotgun, robbed Peter Dixon of £300 and shot him and Gwenda in the face at point-blank range. Moving back now to the 1960s for two interesting stories, the first of which takes us to the Radio Shack of Tom Grace in the summer of 1968. Grace, 37, from Haydock, received what was believed to be a bomb threat bulletin on his shortwave radio. He claimed he heard the directive, supposedly from a Czech freedom group to Russian invaders, twice on Monday the 26th of August 1968. The message came over in the 15-metre shortwave band, around 21 MHz. The transmission was crackly, and a voice spoke in English with an accent and said that bombs planted in Russia and two other Iron Curtain countries would be detonated unless the present situation stops. This was referring to the Soviet invasion of Czechoslovakia, when on the 20th of August 1968 the Soviet Union led Warsaw Pact troops in an invasion of Czechoslovakia to crack down on reformist trends in Prague. Grace claimed that the broadcaster alleged that secret agents had planted atom bombs in a number of countries, 4 in Poland, 5 in Hungary, 3 in East Germany, 10 in Russia, and 5 in their own country. It said that the bombs would be exploded if the demands of the Czech secret organisation were not met. These demands were that the Russians should withdraw from Czechoslovakia and that all political prisoners should be released. This was dismissed as nonsense by a Czech embassy spokesman in London the same week. Police and 2 Staffordshire firms operating fleets of vehicles joined forces for more than 3 hours on Monday the 15th of July 1963 in an effort to trace the source of a mysterious voice which moaned on the air and said, "I'm trapped by my foot." The call was picked up in the late afternoon in the Cannock Radio Control headquarters of Staffordshire Farmers Limited. At first it was thought that one of the firm's own drivers was in trouble on the road and calling for help. All but one of the drivers were contacted by radio. By then, Staffordshire Police had been informed and soon traced the other driver and found that he too was okay. It was then realised that the police traffic control at Dudley and a company called Tarmac Limited at Blackheath were using the same radio frequency for their vehicles. Dudley Radio Control quickly accounted for all of its men, and after 3 hours, Tarmac Limited had contacted all but one of its drivers. For a while it was thought that this man, who was on his way back from Gloucester, had been responsible for the call. Soon after 7 p.m, 3.5 hours after the alarm was first raised, the driver reported back to Blackheath on schedule and left the mystery unsolved. One possible explanation was that due to conditions, Staffordshire Farmers Radio Control picked up a genuine distress call from miles out of the Midlands, and that some man really was trapped somewhere. The other possibility was that this was a hoax of very poor taste. It was never solved. Staying within the same area, but this time in 1991, police sealed off and searched part of Cannock Chase following a tip-off from an amateur radio enthusiast. He told police that he overheard a conversation on his radio between two men. Police refused to reveal the contents of the conversation, but immediately sealed off part of the chase amid fears of possible terrorist activity. A search revealed nothing, and a spokesman said, "As far as we're concerned, the matter is now closed. I cannot reveal what was said, but I can confirm it was nothing to do with the IRA or any other terrorist group for that matter." They were satisfied that the radio ham was genuine and acted in good faith. "We won't be taking the matter any further," said the spokesman. Fears that an IRA cell may be based on the chase were sparked off in January 1991, when a mystery explosion at the Rugeley rifle ranges on Penkridge Bank was followed by shots being fired at a courting couple. Not a sinister story, but one I wanted to include, was that of Christopher Brockbank, an 18-year-old radio amateur from Stockport who heard an unusual transmission back in early 1963. He was asked to relay a request for rare drugs from a hospital in Catania, Sicily, to manufacturers in Basel, Switzerland. He told police, who then contacted the Italian and Swiss consulates. It was then found that the makers had a branch in Manchester and a factory in Leeds, and so the message was sent to them. And finally, we finish with a vague story from Scunthorpe in which a radio amateur heard an abduction plot in 1989. His report sparked a police investigation after he heard two men discussing the abduction of a child over the air. The amateur radio enthusiast, who was never named by police, tuned into the men's conversation and taped it. He handed the tape to police, who were treating the conversation as genuine. Authorities investigated the contents of the tape and began attempting to identify the individuals involved in the conversation. The police urged anyone with further information to come forward as they continued their inquiry into this serious but subsequently unsolved allegation. If you have any stories of people hearing transmissions they shouldn't, get in touch.